in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giuliano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Stacey Porter. She's the Chief People Officer at Outset Medical. Stacey, thanks so much for being here with us. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for folks who are listening, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hi, Christina. So glad to be here. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Um, yes, so I am the head of people and culture at Outset Medical, and that is just a joy. It is equal parts exhilarating and exhausting because we're a busy, growing company. But this is an incredible job, and our people are so worthy of being served and served well. So I really do just enjoy what I do. And when I was little, I really wanted to be a psychologist. I really wanted to be in a clinical practice, and I have a background in social work, and so it was really kind of differentiating my career to be, in some kind of people service role, but found positive psychology and found the psychology of work and started my career in sales and really believe that teams, when they are well chartered and they have a clear mission, can do almost anything. So became a kind of peak performance coach, if you will.
Yes, and I have a lot of questions about what it takes and kind of the strategy behind the performance coach and all the things you do in terms of company culture, empowering others to really be culture champions too. But I also want to ask too, Stacey, how would you answer the question, kind of what defines you?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Starting with the biggest question out there. I would say what defines me is I'm a talent advocate. I mean, I believe in the power of people, and
Mhm.
I believe in the power of communities. And gosh, man, if you don't, the world is a really bleak place. But I certainly um, never get surprised by the generosity and the service of human beings. And so I will always be, and it is in my blood and DNA, a talent advocate. And I think that my work, you just see that in kind of all the jobs I've had. I am connecting people to people, or I'm connecting people to information, or I'm connecting people to opportunity. And that's kind of the best work that I can do, I believe.
I love that. I think being an advocate is really important, being a connector of people and kind of designing systems to be kind of equitable is also important too. And we're talking about all these things in terms of company culture. I feel like, especially right now, when people are really reflecting on kind of what environment they want to work in, whether it's virtual, remote, or in person, I'd love to ask, as the head of kind of people and culture, what are qualitative and quantitative ways you think about really keeping a pulse on what's happening and really measuring that company culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not one that's easy to answer, right? Because
Yeah.
you're getting information from all kinds of sources. One of the things that always felt important to me was that, if I was going to be in a people leader role, I needed to be of the people. So one of the things that I do in my practice is I meet and talk and live with employees all day long. I am sitting working in the break room. I'm having coffee with somebody. I'm having lunch with one of our leaders. There are like, in a day, there are numerous conversations that let me know the vibe of our company. We also quantitatively get, kind of a pulse every year just about our engagement, the pride that people have in working in Outset, how they feel like they're being recognized. Do they have a boss that seems sincere and caring, is making an investment in them? So we're getting those sources as well. The great thing about Outset, and we've designed it to be very anti-corporate, is that information just flows really well. So I could be grabbing a coffee and somebody says, "Hey, you know what? I just read this book about, how to reinforce your boundaries, and I'm able to find more time with my kids." And I'm like, amazing. Let's set up a little group of people so you can share that more broadly. So very, very much just I'm kind of just staying alive and listening out here.
being one of the people always listening, always getting that kind of feedback too. And I know in previous conversations, you mentioned something around kind of that anti-corporate culture. And I thought that was really interesting and something that was definitely kind of attracting to me as well. Working in kind of a startup environment, there's innovation. Can you share a specific example of how you build that kind of culture and how it's similar to a product too?
Yes. Oh gosh, absolutely, Christina. I think the biggest way you build an anti-corporate culture is you think about all of the ways that companies create boundaries for employees and
Okay.
create control mechanisms, and you do the opposite. So one thing that we hear this all the time, that scale brings certain challenges,
Yeah.
but one of the things that you can do to keep a company um, very just kind of active and thriving and healthy is you can really work on information flow.
Hmm.
Because when employees know what's going on in their company, they don't care if they don't get invited to a specific meeting, especially if they know the meeting's going to have an agenda that's published and there's a readout afterwards. You don't have as much FOMO in the workplace. You actually have this like joy of missing out because you realize that meeting is in good hands and
Yeah.
you don't need to be there and you could be focused on something that's actually a higher level of contribution for you. So information flow is really important. Sometimes in companies is as information slows down and you have more people and you get like plaque in your corporate arteries. Um, we're human beings. One of the things we do well is create conspiracy theories. And so you can create conspiracy theories in organizations, which are often not at all true. But because information is slowed down or it's patchy, we will fill in the gaps and often with misinformation. So one of the things we do at Outset is we have town halls regularly. So we once a month are on the town hall. Um, our town halls are very informal. In fact, I always liken them to like the Blair Witch Project. Like they're very like the camera's shaky. Two speakers are like, wait, am I going first? Or are you going first? So they're very informal, but it doesn't have a polish or a production. It really just has a sense of realness. And I think that that feels like you get the true sense of what's happening in your company. And the last thing I'll say in kind of an anti-corporate culture and really one that's built like a product is ideas can come from anywhere and they can work themselves into the organization and they can manifest and they are attributed to the person who truly hatched it. So you get this sense from employees that, hey, you know what? I can build the culture around me. And I'll give you an example. We had one of our engineers came by one day and it was late in the evening and he was walking by and he stopped in my office. And by the way, tucked under his arm is this like longboard skateboard. It was like so cool. And he was like, you know what we should do around here? We should have a happy hour and let, if we have artisans in the company, let them showcase their work. And I'm like, wait a second, are you talking like a gallery walk? Like, what is this? And so we hatched this idea. And Christina, we did it just a couple of months ago. It was wildly successful. People brought paintings, people brought pottery, people brought chairs. We have somebody who makes furniture here. It was just dazzling and it was just not hard to do.
Yeah.
And this employee hatched the idea. He was kind of the master of ceremony. And we got, enough spaces so that you could showcase the art. And then we all got to walk through and have wine while we did it. So
Well,
it just gives you a sense that the people in your company are really vibrant. They're really interesting, and you can showcase that in different ways.
yeah, innovation comes from anywhere. I love that example. I think that is important too. And I think that also gives folks an ownership mentality around the places that they work, that ideas are listened to, and it sparks that creativity, which is also important as well. You mentioned town halls and being amongst the people, if you will. I'd love to ask, how can organizations identify kind of those hidden dangers? Like, you would have those really strong foundations, but for example, like misunderstandings or misaligned goals or values, and proactively find them by empowering employees to speak up.
Oh, yeah, that is exactly the right question to ask. I think what you want to think about are a couple things. Like, if we think about, hey, in our organization, we want to be great at what? And if you say, we want to be great at kind of a purpose-filled mission. Okay, great. How do you do that? We want to be great at challenge filled jobs. Okay, how do we do that? We want to create teams that are strong and kind of self-nurturing and disband when the mission is over and then kind of reband in new configurations. So if you can identify what you want to be, then you design for that.
Hmm.
And so, for example, if you want to design for these strong teams, the first thing you have to do is have great managers.
Yeah.
And if you have great managers who manage like 21st century leadership, not like a manager in the middle who's kind of doling out,
Sure.
a little bit of information here, a little bit of a task here. But if you have a manager who truly believes in bringing people together, giving them enough framing, but also getting out of the way so they can do something brilliant, you have 21st century managers. And that actually creates a lot of goodness in an organization when a manager can have a very clear vision, can put in infrastructure so people can have challenging jobs, but that you're driving results, and who invests sincerely in people's careers and their goals long term. That those are very human traits. So if you can build that into great, if you already have great people and you can build in great management traits, I mean, Christina, organizations really do transform. Great managers transform organizations. I firmly, firmly believe that.
Absolutely. I think everybody has heard the kind of phrase around people don't leave organizations, they leave bad managers. And it's the people you're talking to on a day to day basis. You can tell if they are genuinely invested in you as a person and your career as well. And in terms of career development goals, some folks want to move on from being an individual contributor to a manager. With the caveat, not everyone should be managers, especially if they do not want to be. But in order to really think about those skills and create an environment where people can do their best work in an ideal world, how do you kind of resource that kind of new manager? Are there any key steps or trainings that you've seen work really well?
Oh, love it. Yes, so a couple of things. One is you nailed it. You said not everybody should be a manager, and it's exactly right. Also, um, people should come in and out of management. And the reason why is because management is not a tenure track position. Like once you're there, it's not like you're there forever. I think the best managers remember what it's like to be a follower. And so if you come in and out of management, you're like, hey, there is a reason why I'm in charge. And then there's a reason why I am actually following and I'm adding my skill set to this team.
Mhm.
So if you can create a culture where people can come in and out of management, that's that really reduces the ego around leadership. The second thing is you have to create a space where managers can get good. So if you say you're going to have good managers, you have to really invest in them getting great. And we have a program that we call Spark, and Spark is really how do you unleash the talent on your team? And there are, and actually, Christina, you can see behind me, I have got all of these
Yes, all
books
the
on
books.
productivity and performance, just like you do in your home. But the big thing with great management is you have to master three conversations. You have to master what work is important, so the priorities conversation. You have to tell people how they're doing, so it's the success or the performance conversation. And then you have to be sincerely interested in where somebody wants to go in the future. So you have to master the growth conversation. So our program Spark, all we care about is that managers get great at those three conversations.
I love that. I think that's important, and kind of clearly having that framework for everyone too. Of those three pillars is really important. Setting up that foundation, and resourcing people with the tools as well. In terms of kind of the organizational structure of a company, we know that the old way of working or thinking about organizations was very hierarchical. How
Yeah.
do you kind of subtract that hierarchy at your organization in a really intentional way, and also have that accountability and support?
Oh, this is something I love talking about because there are a couple of ways you can do it very concretely.
Mhm.
One of the things that we already talked about, but bears repeating, is just information flow. If people know what's going on, they can make decisions and they can make really informed decisions. So that's one. The other thing is if you're going to tell people what's going on, you have to let people make decisions with the if they're the closest to the issue. So we decentralize decision making. So if you and I were on a team together and you're the one closest to the issue, nobody is going to look to me to make that decision. They're going to all eyes will pan to you like we're on some kind of a soap opera, and they're going to say, Christina, what are we going to do? And so that's really important, is the decision making. You have the authority to make decisions at all level. The third thing I think that's really important is that you can bring people together and celebrate and recognize achievements at all corners of the company. In fact, we just had a town hall, and our CEO, who is just incredible, and by the way, I always laugh with her. I'm like, "You're so bohemian," and she's like, "What are you saying about like my fashion sense?" I said, "No, it's not about your fashion sense, which is not bohemian because it's like so polished and elegant." I said, "You're bohemian because you're so grounded and down to earth." We hire for executives to be grounded and down to earth, but they also notice things. They're responsive and they notice what's going on in the company and they call it out all the time. So there is this real sense that people are seen and they're visible, and we know how to value work. Like we just had a town hall and we talked about our accounting team and what a kick-ass job they just did on the work we've been doing around SOX compliance.
Mhm.
Now, I've never been in a company that has called out the accounting team for kick-ass work on a compliance project. But it's critical to our scale and growth, and it is excellence.
Mhm.
So I thought that was incredible, and you could see that team just light up on chat because that's unusual for infrastructure groups to be called out and celebrated, but they are the glue.
Yeah.
They keep a company anti-fragile and they keep a company healthy.
Absolutely. People want to know that their work has value, and actively celebrating that across teams, across the organization is also really important, and a signal that your work is important, and that it's noticed, recognized, seen, heard, understood, valued, all of the kind of verbs that you mentioned as well. In terms of kind of the meaningful relationships and connections, the environment you're creating, it does come down to relationships, and just like any other kind of relationship in life, trust is so important. And it's something that is also intentionally worked on and kind of signaled to others as well. Some organizations say they have kind of this open door policy, or that they don't have a hierarchy, but it really comes down to action. So, what are some kind of methods you use to really build trust within your organization, encourage people to come to you and the people team with positive thoughts, negative thoughts, constructive feedback? Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I so love this question, and when I was thinking about some of the conversations I'd had with MJ before you and I got introduced, one of the things that I was thinking about is trust in organizations, right? Because the cost of mistrust is really high, and the cost of employees who have ideas but who don't share them because they don't feel like anybody cares is really damaging. So I think a couple things on trust. One is we're direct. This is a very direct culture. And so I'll give you an example. I had a colleague who came to me and who said, "Hey, there are some people in my area who wear too much cologne, and it is so I can't deal with it. So what are you going to do
Relatable.
about it?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, "Well, you're people ops." And I said, "Yeah, and you're an adult who sits next to somebody who wears too much cologne. You need to tell him or her." And he's used perfume, so I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but um, and he said, "But isn't that something you handle or put in the handbook?" And I said, "No, that's no. We handle direct conversations here, and if there's something that we need to turn into a policy because it's kind of a way that we work around here, we'll add it to the handbook. But if you have an issue with the neighbor who's wearing too much cologne, that's a conversation to have." And so he left, and he was a little bit disgruntled. So I followed up the next day. I'm like, "Hey, did you have the conversation about the perfume?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Not yet." And I said, "Okay, well then I'm going to come by a week later." And I came by a week later, like, "Hey, did you have the conversation about the perfume?" And he said, "I did," and it actually went really well. And one of the things that this person said was, "Oh, I didn't even know anybody could smell it, and I'll dial it back. But thank you for telling me that this was a problem." And I was like, good for you for being so direct. So I think part of trust is just you don't have hidden agendas. You're just direct and you're adult. I think that the second thing about trust is exactly what the person who was on the receiving end of this conversation did, what was responsiveness. He did something about it. He might like wearing this perfume or cologne and kind of dousing it liberally, but he dialed it back because somebody said, hey, you know what, I'm sensitive to that. And so I think there's a real relationship with being direct and being upfront and being responsive and trying to make the workplace just a little bit easier for everybody. And I know that sounds simple, but that's just signal response.
Love tangible examples here. So I think that that definitely makes sense in terms of effective communication, in terms of trust, having that intention of I'm telling you this and like having that open mindset as well for the feedback and also your responsiveness as well for following up with the individual who came to you and saying, did you have that conversation? Not a period at the end of a sentence, but an ellipses or just like a continuing process as well for support. I definitely also want to ask too, we're going to be in March 2022 and it's Women's History Month and International Women's Day, always supporting women 365 days a year and gender equity, of course. But this year's theme is break the bias. And I want to ask folks, how are you encouraging breaking the bias at Outset Medical?
Oh, yeah. And this is a really important conversation, right? Because I think what you really want to do with bias is understand it. And by the way, bias is not unconscious. I know we have all of this unconscious bias training.
Mhm.
There's no way that your body's going to keep you in a state of not understanding that there's a threat response,
Sure.
or there's something that you're uncomfortable about. You're going to be conscious of that. So I think often the unconscious moniker around bias is kind of to make us feel okay that we've got some thought patterns that actually need to be examined.
Mhm.
But I think with bias, I think you want to understand it, and you want to just examine it and say, hey, you know what? Is this well founded? Is this does this come from a place that actually I need to look at changing? Does my behavior impact somebody else in a negative way? So I think it's self work. One of the things that we've done, and I actually really enjoyed this so much, and again, it was an idea from one of our employees, is we have these tables of six. And the tables of six are interesting because they're just a kind of a motley crew of people who get invited to join a conversation, and it's around bias and empathy.
Mhm.
And part of the table of six is to say, hey, you know what? I have been on the receiving end of bias, or I actually have a bias, and I'm starting to get a sense for how it was formed, and I want to change it.
Mhm.
And we talk about empathy. Hey, these people naturally get my empathy, and these groups naturally don't get my empathy, and I need to examine that. But it's to be able to be open and honest about that, and then do the work to change it if you believe it needs changing, versus to go through, a lot of the unconscious bias trainings, they have great intent, right? The great intent is to bring the way our actions impact others to the surface so we can think about changing that and where does that kind of thought pattern come from. But I think that, we need to do the personal work to say, hey, I have a bias on people with tattoos, and it's actually a beautiful form of art that people engage in and wear personally. It's like fashion. But where did that tattoo kind of bias come from? Did it come from my upbringing in Kentucky? That's actually true for me. I did have like this, like, hey, why would people ever get a tattoo and a face tattoo? At that, I don't understand that at all. Um, but I have asked people about tattoos and what they mean, and sometimes the stories are just incredibly moving. So I really needed to kind of think about where was that coming from for me. So I think that in this time, um, examination is the course of a human life, right? I mean, if we're not evolving and examining and trying to shift towards a better kind of version of ourselves than we have died, even though we are alive and still breathing, but you kind of died mentally. And so I think that's the work human beings do throughout their lifetime.
I think that self work and that individual onus is really important, that self awareness. And then, of course, the next step, it's never too late to kind of change those preconceived notions and then take action on it as well. Have those conversations as you were talking about too. And I think over the past 2 years, as we're thinking about work and kind of innovation in the space, people have redesigned kind of systems to be more equitable and after that self work made that systemic change as decision makers, as leaders. I would love to know, have you kind of redesigned a system or process as well at Outset Medical?
Yes, and so one of the things that we have really looked at are a couple of things. One is we want to sincerely invest in inclusion. Diversity just is. We're going to go always for the best talent we can find, always. And we're going to use the broadest methods possible to find talent. And you know, Christine, I mean, this workplace and this talent market, great talent can go anywhere right now. And so you have to have an offer that is really unusual and stunning and kind of aligned with an individual's values. So we will go for the broadest talent pools we can find. The second thing for us is to sincerely invest in inclusion. And what does that mean? For us, that means that we want to make sure that people can get involved at all levels of this company. We want to make sure that when people join Outset, there is a really concrete plan for how to integrate up until 6 months. After that, people typically have their tribes, they get their rhythms, they
Right.
know the systems, that and we're a fast moving company. So after 6 months, kind of off and running. But you need to know how to come in and be. And we have this program, we call it the OG program, and it's Outset Guide. It really is kind of original gangster too, but there's just double entendre there. And what it's about is it's not actually like somebody in your work group. It is somebody who has 6 months of tenure on you. So every outsetter becomes an outset guide at 6 months because they get partnered with somebody who's brand new. And the whole thing is like, hey, what did I wish I knew coming in the door? How
Yeah.
did I meet people? How did I learn the systems? Who's a guru for this? And so it's basically it's the 6 month eyes that help people really integrate. So that's another. And then the last thing for us is really around the medical device industry. So
Mhm.
oftentimes candidates and employees will box themselves out of the medical device industry because they think they need to be a doctor or an engineer or have worked in medical devices or have a physician in the family, ad nauseum, ad infinitum. Um, and really, it's not true. We want to show all of the different jobs here. And so we're going into schools. We're going to ninth graders because ninth grade has been shown to be such a predictor of long term success and talking about careers in the medical device industry. Hey, you can be an accountant in a medical device industry. You can be a people leader in medical device industry. You can be in IT. You can be in analytics. You can make a job. You don't just have to have a job. So very much going early, making sure that people know that this industry welcomes you, welcomes people in who want to make a difference, and just trying to broaden out those talent pools, even starting in high school.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts very early. And also, I think to your point as well, in terms of pairing someone that 6 months of experience, asking those questions of what would have liked to know when you joined the organization and passing that information along. It's that flow of information, the transparency, creating those meaningful connections at work that foster innovation. Stacey, we talked about a lot in terms of company culture and all the things that you're doing to really promote, a great place to work. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or maybe underscoring 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope people bring with them?
You asked all the right questions. You were deep in your trade, and you've got kind of this like mastercraft. So no, Christina, you were spot on. And what I would just love to say to you and our listeners is we need more talent builders out there.
Mhm.
The new competency in kind of the people function is really being able to be a culture builder. It's not about compliance. It's not about kind of this administrative excellence.
Right.
Yes, those things need to be a part of the equation, but It is, how do you build sustaining and durable cultures?
Mhm.
And there's many more books to be written on this, and there's just more field work to do. And that's what I'm going to be doing, is the field work.
That's exciting. I can't wait to have your book on my shelf back here as well.
Hey,
Uh,
let's write it together.
there you go. I'm very down for that. I'm very down for that. Stacey, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thanks, Christine. I had a blast.
Of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.